Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 301 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what makes a terrorist. And it is Sunday the 15th of December 2024 as I recorded this. So today's episode is absolutely brilliant. I'm very excited for this because not only does this celebrate a brand new book that I've released, which is The Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking, but we get to bust some massive myths about terrorists and terrorism, which, to be honest, I admit, picking this book to be released in December might not have been the best idea, especially with it being so close to Christmas. Christmas meant to be a nice, happy time of year, filled with joy, laughter. We're not meant to think about death whatsoever. So my mind naturally goes to, let's talk about terrorists. Now, please forgive that oversight. So I did not realise that I was actually going to do that. But today we're going to bust some myths about terrorists. Specifically, that terrorism isn't actually caused by a mental health condition. It also isn't caused by a specific personality type. But there are mental health and different personality factors that play a role in this. So this is a fascinating podcast episode. I really enjoyed researching this, but also developing this and just writing it up. This was a lot of fun. It really does help you to understand why terrorists act the way that they do, and very concerningly, we can actually see how this is applied in the real world and how future situations could play out. But that's more in the book itself. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is funny because I've not learnt this. Did you perceive the invisible gorilla after all? The invisible gorilla study is a staple of undergraduate psychology teaching. This classic 1999 work found that when people were asked to watch a video of a basketball game and to count the passes between players, many failed to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking onto the court. It's one of the best known examples of unintentional blindness, the idea that when our attention is engaged, we can fail to perceive clearly visible visual stimuli. However, a recent paper in eLife now suggests that we do perceive some of this visual information after all. Now, this article says that the invisible gorilla study is a staple of undergraduate psychology teaching. I have never heard of this study before whatsoever. I think I've heard of similar things in terms of the blindness angle, but nope, I've never heard of this invisible gorilla. So maybe this is I was about to say maybe this is a staple of undergraduate teaching in the US, but this is a UK publication. So anyway though, so I'm not going to get caught up on the details. But this is actually a really fun effect that which I should probably read up more about at some point, but I just haven't decided to. But I am aware of this effect because I know that in my cognitive psychology lectures, especially when it came to the topic of perception, but there's been a lot of research about how we actually don't take in that much information from our environment from time to time. And the attention angle, which does remind me of, I think it's called spotlight theory, where our attention is basically like a spotlight. So we spotlight something that we've got our attention on. For example, right now I'm spotlighting my attention on the podcast, but there could be other stuff going on around my in the environment, but because I'm not paying attention to it, I'm missing it. So that sort of stuff is actually quite interesting. And perception is a really important area of cognitive psychology. So the next one is coping together, staying together. The moments of a challenge, the way how couples respond together rather than just as individuals, can be pivotal to their well-being as well as the health and security of the relationship itself. This is what's known as dyadic coping, working as a unit to manage stress, provide emotional support, and solve problems. Dyadic coping can be particularly helpful when one partner becomes unwell, as illustrated in new research by Mansi M. Mitty and her colleagues, published recently in the Journal of Rheumatology. Their focus is on those with rheumatoid arthritis and their partners who navigate challenging symptoms such as severe stiffness and joint pain, and often associated mental health challenges. However, the team's findings highlight broader benefits of a dyadic coping that could inform couples facing many kinds of stress. Okay, so that's a really interesting one because I know that there's going to be a future podcast episode. I do not know what, or when though. Is that it's something to do with how you deepen friendships, and I always remember one of the sections that I talk about, and one of the ways that you can deepen friendships is that you can is that you can basically just go through things together, provide support for each other, whether this is physical support or emotional support, and that can really help like couple or two friends to actually deepen their relationship because it shows that like you're there for the other person, you really care about them, and the reason why I use the friendship example is because I've never been in a relationship, so I cannot talk about this from personal experience. But I can understand that dyadic coping is a very powerful tool for deepening relationships, but also strengthening them because as you go through stuff together, then not only do you feel emotionally closer and you actually know just how much the other person cares for you, but it also goes to show that you work really well together. So you should probably hang around together for a little bit longer. So going back to the article itself, I can see how this can also apply to physical but also mental health conditions. The final one is why it's worth embracing uncertainty. There's no question that we find ourselves in uncertain times. Looking at current events and wondering about what the future may hold can leave us feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and stressed, to say the least. Yes, that's definitely true. But uncertain times aren't always the ominous force we make them out to be. In fact, research suggests that they can create unique opportunities for growth and transformation that we wouldn't otherwise encounter. In our newest episode of our podcast, PsyCrunch, Ella Rose chats with Maggie Jackson, author of Uncertain and expert on uncertainty, unpacking how uncertainty shapes our lives. Together, they explore how embracing the unknown can open doors to unexpected possibilities and can lead us to greener pastures. Now, this is definitely a psychology news article that is definitely worth exploring because when I first thought about this, I was like, no, that can't be true. But actually, I definitely think that it can because if I think about my own life, that has been filled with very much uncertainty from time to time, then it has impacted my life in different ways. I would definitely say that as a survivor of childhood trauma, I could definitely say that the uncertainty that that trauma created for me did lead me towards um, psychology in a very unintended ways. And it's only been in the past few years that I've realized that's one of the major reasons why I've decided to pursue a psychology career. So I would say without the uncertainty of knowing if I would survive or whether I would actually be kicked out or beaten, then I would definitely say that that's led me to something brilliant, which is like psychology. Because without psychology, I wouldn't have my books, I wouldn't have my current friends, I wouldn't be at university, I wouldn't have this podcast for starters, and I wouldn't have ever met any of you wonderful listeners. So that's been a very good benefit. If I also look at um, politics, I will not get into politics, but as dark as they have been, there have been some benefits as I've tried to navigate how uncertain and how unpredictable this is. For example, without the current political situation, I never would have wanted to become an Irish citizen. And even though I'm still in the process of that, and I fully admit my foreign birth registration could still be rejected, but I still learnt a lot along the way. It's still actually been like great fun though. So even if that doesn't pan out, which I will honestly be gutted if it doesn't. I will be so upset and so disappointed. It's still been a learning experience, and it's still been something that I've been able to bond with with like friends over. Yeah, but I really, really, really want to be a dual national quite badly though. But again, that never would have happened if the uncertainty of the world wasn't about them. And then there's been then there's been a friendship examples, certain business opportunities, etc. So uncertainty definitely isn't this massive horrific thing though. Even as an autistic person who I really like to know what's going on, it can still be exciting at times. So I think the takeaway from this psychology news article is that yes, we do live in extremely uncertain times, especially with what's been happening in the news for the past God knows how many months. But all the uncertainties can still provide us with opportunities. We've just got to train ourselves to recognize them and take advantage of them instead of being too anxious to move and react, which is something that's very important skill to learn. So I really hope that you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. This week has been absolutely brilliant, and I flat out loved this week because there's been a lot of great things that are going on because it was the last week of term, and I was able to do lots of really fun things. Though, for example, I forget what Monday and Tuesday was. I just know I was insanely busy because I gave myself a massive to-do list. Yes, it wasn't all practical, but I had a lot of fun. Mainly because I was trying to get into a lot of stuff that I've not been able to do since I was raped. This is like the final point of my healing, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I'll always be dealing with different bits and the pieces, but nowhere near as intense as it once was. So, I got back to reading. Now, I love reading. I love stories. It's sort of a prerequisite to being a writer, so I've not done that much reading for ages. But I did set myself the goal of reading, of having 5 different reading sessions this week. So far, I've managed to hit 3. I'm gonna try and do an hour-long session tonight, and I'm gonna class that as a 2. So basically, read for a half an hour a day, which I mean's reasonably ambitious considering I'm basically going from 0 to 30 minutes, but I just want to try. I just want to get back into reading because I love it. It's amazing. And I have read some really good romance and short stories set around the holiday season, so I really do recommend reading. It's great for your mental health, it's brilliant escapism, and it's just so much fun. I've loved it. I've also managed to get back into some videos, so some online courses, which I've got so many of. But again, I've not been able to watch them since May, basically, which is a massive shame. But as I started watching them, I was like, oh, I've missed this so much. This is so brilliant because I used to watch these weekly because they're like weekly courses, and it's just so much fun. It's so relaxing, and I love learning. I love learning so much because it's just fun. I get to learn new things. I get to use them in the real world, and I get to practice them. And it's just, oh, I flat out love learning more than anything else in the world. It's so much fun, and yeah, life is brilliant. I've also been doing quite a bit of writing this week, which has been a lot of fun. So life has just been really good. I've been really productive. But also on Wednesday, something that I did was I went to my university's winter showcase, which is basically PhD students come together and they present their research. Now I'm a master's student. I went because it classes as what my university does, called the Global Skills Award, which basically means that you're cultured. You've gone to a whole bunch of like cultural talks to extend your learning, deepen your understanding of the world, which I really like. To be fair, I didn't do it last year, but I really wanted to do it this year because it's my last year at the university. Mm. So there were some quite interesting talks. One was on carbon washing, which was really good. So that's basically about companies lying about their carbon emissions and everything that they're doing to reducing their carbon emissions. And then the paper was basically arguing, could artificial intelligence basically be a way to govern this this honesty around carbon emissions and other green policies. So that was quite interesting. Then the other talk that I caught the last half of was something along the lines of, does working from home impact fertility rates? Turns out it does. Now, as you can see, none of these are psychology related, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is one, it's something that I did, and it's something to do with education. Two, if you're a current university student, whether you're PhD, Masters, undergrad, whatever, if your university offers extra opportunities that aren't psychology related, do them. I mean, look at them. If you think they're going to be interesting, then what's stopping you? If so, I've been at university for 6 years now. Wow, that's a long time. So, and in these past 6 years, I think the reason why this year and last year have been my best year at university is simply because one, I'm actually down here. To be fair, that's why this year's been the best so far, because I'm down in like Canterbury. I'm here so I can do whatever I want, and I don't need to think about what time I'm gonna get home. Though, but another reason is because I'm saying yes to exciting opportunities, which I'm never gonna get again. I really am realizing that this year, because this is my last year at university. So again, that I would say, if you're a student, look at what your university offers and just go for it. Have fun. Like one of my newer friends, they're doing a vampire literature, a wild module for this academic year, this term, and they do not study literature whatsoever, but they've loved it. And last night I was listening to them and I was like, I do not care about vampire literature. Yes, I'm a writer, but I don't care. But you're really interesting because of it. So please tell me more. And it's just like, that's what I love about university. You meet so many different people, but going back to the uncertainty that we covered in the psychology news section, first time I've ever done that. First time I've ever linked one of these personal updates back to something we did in the news section. I'm very impressed with myself here. So going back to that uncertainty principle, university will make you very anxious, overwhelmed though, because this is a brand new egg experience, and you don't know how you're going to do. You don't know if you're going to make friends. You don't know if you're going to be successful. But don't let that stop you. Keep going, keep having fun, keep saying yes to things because you'll be able to get new egg experiences, new information, and they all make great stories for the future. Just something to bear in mind. There are moments like that when I think I should become a motivational speaker. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And today's episode has been sponsored by my brand new book, Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking, a forensic and criminal psychology guide to terrorism, terrorists, and hostage situations. So this brand new book is a lot of fun. It's brilliant. I flat out loved researching it, putting it together, and writing it up. Because whenever there's a news story, whenever we read about terrorism, we always want to know why. And psychology is at a brilliant place to actually understand why do people perform these horrific behaviours. Are they born this way? Are they made this way? Of course, we all know the answer is that they're made this way, but why? Is it cultural factors? Is it mental health? Is it actually personality factors? Is there something in their brain, etc.? So this great, really easy to understand book that's really engaging helps you to understand this at a deeper level. And by the end of researching this book, let alone writing it, I was able to understand a lot more and apply it to the real world. For example, like, dare I get slightly political here? Well, the whole Gaza situation with the Hamas, well, what Israel's doing isn't actually going to reduce Hamas recruitment very much. And if you read this book, you'll be able to understand why I say that. So that is Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking. Available at all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you requested. And you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence from selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Baker & Taylor, Overdrive, and Biblioteca. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you wanted to become patrons of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what makes a terrorist, and I'm going to read you an extract from my book, Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking. And also there are quite a few references and citations in this chapter, but I'm not going to read out very many of them. Just in audio, it's a bit hard, and I am dyslexic, so I will butcher all of these, and I already butcher them enough in the psychology news section. So out of respect for the researchers who work really hard to make this research possible, I'm not going to read out their names. So let's dive into it. The general consensus is that it takes time to convert a vulnerable person into a terrorist, because this is a process and different terrorists, recruits, have different motivation. For example, a need to belong, the development of a satisfactory personal identity, social alienation and boredom leads to dissidence and protests on a small scale. Then, over time, terrorism, as well as histories of child abuse, trauma, humiliation, and social injustice, are common in a terrorist background as well. Although Borum 2004 doesn't feel like this is helpful in explaining terrorism, because these factors are vulnerabilities and they don't make someone a terrorist on their own. Also, Minbar 2007 may be suggesting general vulnerability factors when he suspects susceptibility to indoctrination is key to understanding suicide bombers, due to most suicide bombers that he studied were young and unattached people, which are perfect types for all sorts of violent organizations. As a result, he believed suicide terrorism could be understood as consequences of a terrorist system, with people being recruited through interpersonal connections that then supported the recruit all the way through to becoming a suicide bomber. This is important to learn about because highly committed members of an organization will spend hours talking to recruits, promoting the idea of martyrdom as the will of God, and they focus on the illustration path of Islam. Then the recruits become enmeshed in the group contact, designed to help the recruit prove their allegiance to the organization. Afterwards, this formal contract creates a final personal commitment before a suicide bomber attack. In addition, Menvar compared terror groups to suicide bomb production lines using empirical support from Palestinian suicide bombers. The stages of these production lines, according to Menvar, include indoctrination. This is where members of terror groups with high or authority constantly indoctrinate potential bombers to maintain their motivation to engage in the terrorist act and to prevent them from changing their minds. For Palestinian indoctrination, the themes were nationalism. For instance, Israel's humiliation of the Palestinian state and religion guarantees by saying things like the suicide bombers will go to paradise after committing this act, as well as getting the recruit to commit to the group, is a dana too at this stage, where any doubt about committing to the attack are dealt with, and the motivation for the attack is increased to maximum levels or maxed out, to use more urban slang term. Then the last stage is personal commitment, and this can take the form of video recordings where the terrorist ascribes their intent to do the suicide bombing. This is partly done for their family, but it is also done as a way of getting irreversible commitment, as well as the bomber prepares farewell letters for friends and family for later giving. Also, at this point in the production line, Mira points out that these would-be bombers are called living martyrs, and this whole approach is sympathetic with Hogan and Taylor 2000 and 2001's view that terrorists don't actively choose to become terrorists. Instead, becoming a terrorist is a gradual process where a potential terrorist is socialized with the recruiters, having the ultimate goal of making them perform a terrorist act. Of course, this is a process and not an absolute. People can leave the process at any point, and this is to be expected given the high turnover rate in terrorist group membership. Moreover, Taylor and Lewis 2004 suggested young people find themselves wanting a more hopeful future, and they engage in meaningful behaviors that help them get ahead and will be satisfied with their life. Also, these young people's objective circumstances include no opportunity for good future or advancement, and whilst there might be some collective identity in religion, living in a poor state and community makes them feel marginalised and lost without a clear group. So it's easy to think how terror acts are episode of group processes, with Taylor 2010 asking, can a terrorism truly be understood as a phenomenon of group behaviour? Since Taylor 2010 distinguishes between getting involved in a terror group and actually carrying out attacks. Since the group processes could be important as a backdrop in a terrorism when cultural, political and social factors have a role to play, but these group processes fail to explain the act or episode of terrorism itself. Taylor suggests that there are two main issues with terrorism as group processes argument. There is a lack of a good definition of what is terrorism, besides from what terrorists do, and there isn't a clear idea of what is meant by group processes in relation to terrorism, since there are times when group processes seem to play no or little role in terrorist acts. For example, lone wolf attacks do spring to mind here. Another extreme example is the reclusive Fyodor John Ratsky, whose terrorist campaign lasted for 17 years with 12 bombs and 3 deaths for his environmental agenda that he largely made up alone without a group behind him. What a life story studies. I do enjoy qualitative research, and I think given how hard terrorism is to research, qualitative research methodologies might be useful. Of course, you will still have a lot of the same problems as the rest of terrorism research, as I wrote about in the first chapter, but qualitative research can still be useful, especially as Brum 2004 argued that a terrorist's life experience includes common themes. He suggests that these common themes aren't sufficient causes of terrorism, but they might be helpful to researchers to identify people susceptible to being influenced by terrorist groups. In some ways, this argument fits with the narrative studies that have been done with terrorists, because they reveal other factors are needed to understand what turns someone into a terrorist, and it helps to show that not all terrorists are made because of the similar circumstances. That notion doesn't really have much research support. In addition, since 1992, terrorism has been a feature of Israel's relationship with Palestine. So Dopeman 2004 subscribes to the group processes idea over individual psychology, like personality. Due to, the researcher rejects the idea that suicide bombers are simply young religious fanatics, and instead believes less extremist personality characteristics make up bombers. This was based on his research and interviews with 5 suicide bombers that were arrested before they could carry out their attack, or the bombs failed to detonate, something that happens in another 40% of suicide bombings. The results of his interviews show that there wasn't a single explanation for why they became terrorists, and instead there was a mixture of factors that were responsible, but even this mixture was different for different terrorists. Yet it seems that group solidarity and having a shared ideology were two overriding factors in becoming a terrorist, because most of the interviewed suicide bombers had at least some shared ideology and solidarity. Furthermore, political factors were given as the reasons for becoming suicide bombers, as well as having bad or secondary experiences of dealing with the Israeli Defense Force, such as Israelis shooting one of their friends or beating them. And this is what I find interesting. Most of the suicide bombers have been involved in protests or another form of assembly beforehand they were involved in terrorism. That means these people once wanted change through peaceful means, and something changed to make them believe terrorism was the only option. To explain this, Soderman 2004 suggested as the situation escalates, a person's belief gets more extreme. As well as given the nature of the sample, these suicide bombers were a part of the secular Father movement, so religion wasn't a factor in them becoming terrorists. And despite this terrorist group not tending to have criminal histories, a few of them could have. Another study that offers up more detailed account of the range of factors impacting someone's chance of becoming a terrorist can be found in Savani and Addison's 2005 and their study of the left-wing Marxist terrorists in Nepal and India. This terror group believes that the state is an instrument of the rich and needs to be violently overthrown. The researchers interviewed 12 terrorists and 3 men and women that were no longer in the oaths, with the average age being 26 years old, and they generally lacked a formal education. These interviews were validated by checking court and police records. In this study, rapport building was a priority, and the researchers achieved this by having the terrorists talk about their childhood and matters not directly linked to terrorist activities. Then the researchers suggested common rhetorical structures in the interview. The results of the interview showed that the terrorists had created a strong sense of us, which included their self-image, and they saw themselves as a central character for themselves in their life story, as brave, good, simple, logical, and so on, instead of the reality where the terrorists spoke about themselves, their family, friends, and other people in their community being poor, simple, naive, exploited, short on goods and water, and cheated by others. Also, the interview showed interpersonal figures were important and included rhetoric about our group and others. For example, one rhetoric found was about their beliefs surrounding the government being a characteristic of rich, powerful, evil, uncaring, and inhuman. Overall, this study found that terrorists believe themselves to be heroes and very good people that are fighting against an outgroup that is evil and foul and needs to be defeated. This sense of them being heroes helps them to maintain a positive self-image, and they see their friends and their family and local communities as suffering at the hands of the outgroup, hence why the outgroup needs to suffer for this perceived injustice. In conclusion, if these past 2 chapters have taught you anything, I think we have to conclude that there is really no single factor that causes someone to become a terrorist. It is a mixture of individual, group, and political factors that interact together to make people into a terrorist. So now that we understand how terrorists are made, how do terrorist ideologies and mental processes support these extreme ideologies to develop? So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because terrorism and hostage taking are always 2 fascinating topics which are really important in a modern world, and to be honest, it really does show how psychological theory can be applied in the real world to help people and have a real world impact on our understanding of extremists and terrorists. So this is a flat out critical area that we need to keep researching. And if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to know more, please check out my brand new book, Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking, available in all the usual places. And if you want to become a patron of the show and support the podcast on a monthly basis, now you can at patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. And if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Conor Whiteley. So have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.